Welcome, dear listeners. Today's format is different from the usual. This time, instead of fictional horror stories, we will turn to true horror stories of World War II, told by real people. Enjoy listening.
I'm a history teacher at a community college in Pittsburgh. For 20 years, I've stood in front of classrooms and talked about the good war. I used words like liberation and atrocities. I showed grainy black and white footage. I thought I understood what my grandfather, Clarence Gomberg, went through. I was wrong. Grandpa Code lived over in Stanton Heights. He was a medic in the 333rd Medical Battalion during the war. After the war, he came home, married my grandmother, and spent his entire career volunteering at the VA hospital. He was the quietest, kindest man I ever knew. He never raised his voice. He loved watching the pirates on TV with the sound down low. He never talked about the war. I asked him once when I was a kid working on a school project. He just looked at me, his eyes going somewhere else, and said, "I saw the ovens, Mikey. That's all. Just the ovens." Then he got up and walked out of the room. I felt guilty for asking, like I'd opened a door I shouldn't have. He passed away 2 years ago. Lung cancer. He was 96. The week before he died, he was weak, but his mind was sharp as a tack. He knew his time was short. One afternoon, he just started talking. He told me he needed me to know the truth about what he saw, because the pictures in the history books don't capture it. They can't capture the smell. He told me about the day his unit rolled up to a place called Buchenwald. It was the spring of 1945, a few weeks after the camp had technically been liberated. He said they had no idea what a concentration camp was. The name meant nothing to them. When they pulled up to the gate, there was a guard there, just some soldier left behind. Grandpa got out of his Jeep and walked up to the fence. He pointed to the big brick building with the smokestack inside. He asked the guard what the building was. He said the guard looked at him completely casual and said, "The crematorium for burning the bodies." Grandpa asked, "What bodies?" The guard shrugged. "The Jews." Grandpa just stood there for a second, trying to process those words. He asked if he could go in. The guard said yes. He walked through the gate. The first thing he saw were the ovens. He told me they were big brick things with heavy iron doors. He said his first stupid thought was that they looked like pizza ovens. He couldn't connect them to people. He opened one of the doors. It was empty, but there was a layer of gray dust and small bits of bone on the floor. He closed the door. He walked further into the camp. The smell hit him then. He said it wasn't like anything he'd ever smelled before. It was sweet and heavy and made him sick to his stomach. He saw the piles of clothes, the piles of shoes. He saw the emaciated survivors, people who looked like skeletons wrapped in skin, just staring at him with hollow eyes. He said he didn't last more than 10 minutes. The smell, the sight of those people, it was too much. He turned around and walked out, and he threw up right there by the gate. The next day, he was back at the camp, helping where he could. A boy came out of the woods. He was just a kid, maybe 12 or 13. He was 30 and starving. He walked up to some of the GIs and asked in broken English if he could look through their garbage for something to eat. His name was Mike. Grandpa learned that Mike and his parents had been prisoners. Mike had managed to escape into the woods during a death march. His parents hadn't made it. He'd been hiding in the forest for weeks, eating roots and bugs. Grandpa and the guys in his unit took Mike in. They fed him, gave him clean clothes. They even found a small uniform and tailored it to fit him. He stayed with him for a few days. He was a quiet kid, but he smiled when he got the uniform. He told them he thought he had family in New York, an aunt or an uncle. When the unit had to move on, they took Mike to Paris. They found some Jewish relief workers there and left Mike with them. Grandpa never saw him again. He kept a black and white photo of Mike, standing there in the French sunshine in an oversized tailored GI uniform, giving a shaky salute. Grandpa told me for the rest of his life, every time he looked at that picture, he didn't just remember Mike, he remembered the ovens, he remembered the smell. He said for years after the war, he couldn't eat roasted meat. The smell of a cookout on the 4th of July would send him right back to that place. He looked at me from his hospice bed and said, "I never found out what happened to that boy. I don't know if he made it to New York. I don't know if he lived. That's the part that haunts me most. Not the ovens, but the kid, the one we couldn't save." He passed away 2 days later. I have that photo of Mike now. Sometimes, late at night, I look at it. I think about that kid, standing in the French sunshine in a uniform 10 sizes too big, trying to be a soldier. And I wonder if he ever got to live his life, or if the ovens got him in the end. Grandpa was right. The history books don't capture that smell. They don't capture the feeling of not knowing if the kid you fed ever made it home.
My name is Marilyn, and I live with my dad in Orange City, Florida. He's 81 years old. Most days, he's just a regular guy. He works at the local movie theater, ripping tickets and telling people which way to go. He likes it, keeps him busy. But my dad has a hole in his head. Not a physical hole, but a hole in his memory. 5 months of his life, gone, just vanished. And I recently found out the Army is the reason why. My dad, Lester Anderson, was drafted in 1944. He was from Leominster, Massachusetts. He was a mild-mannered guy, didn't believe in fighting, but he went. He had a wife back home. He went to France with the 255th Infantry. And then, nothing. For my entire childhood, he never talked about the war. We just knew he was a veteran. But when he started getting older, he got curious about those missing months. He started asking questions. He'd watch old war movies, hoping something would trigger a memory. He tried hypnosis. Nothing. We found some old letters he wrote to my mom from France. In one, he talks about sitting in the cellar of a French farmhouse, writing by candlelight, while German soldiers were hiding in the woods outside. He remembers writing that letter, but he doesn't remember anything before or after it. It's like a single photograph in a completely blank photo album. He has snippets. He remembers a terrible headache. He remembers walking through a French town without his rifle or helmet, totally confused, and being picked up by MPs who took him to a doctor. He remembers being in the back of a truck, and there was a dead man in there with him, just a body bouncing along as the truck drove. The next clear memory he has is of being in a locked room. He was strapped to a gurney. 5 men were holding him down. They put gel on his face, attached electrodes to his skin, and sent electricity into his brain, over and over. They gave him electroshock therapy. He told me, "After I took the shock treatments, I remembered my family and my home life. I remembered growing up in Leominster, but I didn't remember the trip through Paris and France. I still don't remember it, not a single thing." He was sent to a hospital in Cape Cod after the war. There they gave him truth serum, sodium pentothal. They were trying to figure out what was wrong with him, I guess. They discharged him with a diagnosis of a nervous condition. I recently got access to some of his old VA medical records. It's been hard because a fire destroyed his official service records, but the medical files survived. In them, a doctor wrote a note. It said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Sketchy history suggests psychotic break under combat stress." My dad didn't have a nervous condition. He had a breakdown. The war, whatever he saw in those 5 months, it broke his brain, and the Army solution was to fry the memories right out of him. Can you imagine?
You go to war, you see something so terrible, so beyond the pale of human experience that your mind just shuts down. You start walking around without a helmet, not knowing who you are, and instead of helping you process it, the doctors strap you to a table and electrocute you until the memories are gone, until 5 months of your life are just deleted. He doesn't remember combat. He doesn't remember if he killed anyone. He doesn't remember if he saw his friends die. He doesn't even remember how he got from France back to the hospital in Massachusetts. He told me once, "It's a sad thing not knowing. It's a piece of my life that is just missing." I think about that sometimes. I think about what it must be like to know that something horrible happened to you, to know it was bad enough to make your mind shatter, but to have zero access to it, to have a black box in your past that you can never open. He works at the movie theater now. He smiles at the customers. He's a gentle, kind old man. And somewhere, locked in the electrical scars on his brain, are 5 months of horror that the U.S. Army decided he was better off not remembering. Maybe they were right.
I live in Wilsonville, Oregon. A few years ago, I got to know my neighbor, Norm Harrison. He was a quiet guy, kept to himself. He was married to a lovely woman named Italia. They seemed like the perfect, peaceful couple. Norm died last year. After Italia passed, he started to open up to a local historian. He told a story he had kept locked inside for over 70 years. It wasn't about fighting. It was about a face. Norm was in Italy during the war. His unit was pushing north through some of the toughest terrain imaginable. He saw friends die. He saw things no one should see. But that wasn't the nightmare that woke him up every night for the rest of his life. The nightmare was about a man in a mess hall. Norm said his unit had just rotated off the line. They were exhausted, filthy, and half-starved. They got sent to a rear area for some hot food and a few hours of sleep. There was a makeshift mess hall set up in a bombed-out building. It was crowded, noisy, filled with the clatter of trays and the murmur of tired men. Norm got his food and sat down at a long table. He was so tired he could barely hold his fork. He started to eat, and then he looked up. Across the table, directly across from him, sat an army officer, a lieutenant. He was just sitting there, perfectly still. He had a tray of food in front of him, but he wasn't eating. He wasn't looking at his food. He was looking at Norm. Norm said the man's eyes were wide open, completely unblinking. They just stared, not with anger, not with sadness, just a vacant, frozen stare, like a doll's eyes. Norm felt a chill run down his spine. It was the middle of the day in a crowded room, but he felt completely alone with this staring man. He looked away, tried to focus on his food. He looked back. The man was still staring. He hadn't moved a muscle. His chest didn't even seem to rise and fall with breath. Norm said it felt like the man was looking through him, not at him, like he was staring at something on the other side of Norm's head, something horrible that only he could see. It freaked Norm out. He pushed his tray away, got up, and sat against a wall, trying to shake the feeling. He asked another guy in his squad if he knew who the officer was. The guy said he didn't, but he'd seen him around, said he was creepy, always just staring. That night, Norm couldn't sleep. He kept seeing those eyes. The next morning, they got orders to move back to the front. As they were forming up, Norm saw the officer again. He was standing off to the side, away from everyone else. His uniform was clean. He was just standing there, at attention, staring straight ahead at nothing. His eyes were still wide open. Norm's squad loaded onto a truck and pulled out. As they drove past, Norm watched the officer until he was out of sight. The man never moved. He never blinked. A few weeks later, Norm heard through the grapevine what had happened to that officer. He was a replacement, a new lieutenant who had shown up just before Norm saw him in the mess hall. He had been sent to the front for his first real combat experience. He was leading a patrol when they walked into an ambush. He didn't get shot. He didn't get wounded. He just snapped.
right there in the middle of the firefight. He dropped to his knees and just stayed there, staring straight ahead, eyes wide open. His men had to drag him back to safety. They sent him to the rear. He was suffering from what they called battle fatigue, severe shell shock. Norm said they sent him to a hospital, but the damage was done. Something in that man's mind had broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. He was alive, his body was fine, but the lights were out. He was just an empty shell that stared. Norm told the historian that for 70 years he had nightmares about that man. He dreamed about those wide, unblinking eyes staring at him from across the mess table. He said it wasn't the blood or the death that haunted him. It was that moment of looking into the eyes of a man who was still breathing, but whose soul had already left. He kept it from Italia for their entire marriage, because he was afraid if she knew that kind of darkness was inside him, she would look at him differently. He was afraid she'd see him as broken. I look at my own neighbors differently now. You never know what kind of faces are hiding in someone's memory.
My name is Sue. I'm 34. I grew up in a quiet house in Portland, Oregon. My grandfather, James "Jim" Holloway, lived with us for as long as I can remember. He was a tall, thin man with a crew cut he kept until the day he died. He worked as a janitor at the local high school. He was gentle. He taught me how to fish. But every single night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, the screaming would start. It was always the same, a sharp, terrified yell, like someone had just grabbed him in the dark. Sometimes he'd yell words, "Get down," or "They're in the holes," or just a name, "Mickey, Mickey, no." Then my grandma would shush him, and the house would go quiet again. I asked my mom about it when I was a kid. She said, "That's just Grandpa. He has bad dreams about the war." I accepted that. He fought in the Pacific. It was a long time ago. He never, ever talked about it. If a war movie came on TV, he'd get up and leave the room. If anyone asked him about being a soldier, he'd just shake his head and walk away. He passed away in 2005. I was in college. Cleaning out his closet, my mom found a small wooden box. Inside was a Purple Heart medal, a few black and white photos, and a Japanese flag. The flag was covered in writing, tiny Japanese characters. There was also a diary. It wasn't a journal, it was a small notebook, and on the first page, in my grandfather's shaky handwriting, was a single entry. It was dated 1994. He was 70 years old. He wrote down one memory, just one. He said he needed to write it down so someone would know why he screamed. This is what he wrote. He was on Okinawa. It was 1945. He was 21 years old. His unit was moving through the island, and the fighting was unlike anything he could describe. He said the Japanese soldiers didn't just fight, they hid. They dug into the island itself. They hid in caves, in tombs, in holes they dug in the ground. They would wait for the Americans to walk past, and then they'd pop up and shoot. One afternoon, his squad came to a clearing. There was a small, abandoned farmhouse. They needed to cross the clearing to get to the tree line on the other side. They spread out and started to walk. My grandfather, Jim, was in the middle. To his right was a kid from Ohio named Mickey. He had red hair and freckles. He was always laughing. He and Jim had become friends. They talked about going fishing together after the war. Mickey wanted to go to Canada. They were about halfway across the clearing when Mickey stopped. He said, "Jim, hold up." Jim stopped. He looked at Mickey. Mickey was looking down at the ground. He had a confused look on his face. Mickey said, "There's something under my foot." Jim looked down. The ground under Mickey's boot was moving, just slightly, like something was pushing up from below. Mickey's eyes got wide. He looked at Jim. He opened his mouth to say something. And then the ground exploded. It wasn't a loud boom. It was more of a muffled thump. Dirt and smoke flew up. Jim was thrown backwards. He landed hard on his back. His ears were ringing. He got to his knees. He looked over to where Mickey had been.
Mickey was gone. There was just a hole in the ground, a small crater, and pieces of things that Jim couldn't look at. He saw a boot with a foot still in it. He saw something red that he knew was Mickey's hair. The Japanese soldiers had dug tunnels, spider holes they called them. They'd dig a hole, cover it with a wooden lid, and cover the lid with dirt. One soldier would hide in the hole with a grenade or a rifle. They'd wait for a soldier to walk over them, pop the lid, and attack. Mickey had stepped right on the lid. Jim said he just stood there, frozen. He couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He just stared at the hole. And then he saw movement. A hand, reaching up out of the hole, grabbing at the edge. The Japanese soldier was trying to climb out. Jim said something snapped in his head. He didn't think, he just reacted. He pulled his pistol and he ran to the hole. He stood at the edge and looked down. A Japanese soldier was looking up at him. He was young. He looked scared. He had dirt on his face. Jim shot him. He shot him until the gun was empty. Then he fell to his knees and he threw up. He wrote in his diary that he didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a soldier. He felt like a murderer. But mostly he just felt empty. He looked at the hole, he looked at the pieces of Mickey, and he realized that Mickey was never going to go fishing in Canada. His squad came running. They pulled him away. They kept moving. They didn't have time to stop. That was war. My grandfather wrote that for the rest of his life, every single night when he closed his eyes, he saw Mickey's face. That confused look when he felt something under his foot. And then he saw the face of the Japanese soldier in the hole, the scared young man with dirt on his face. He wrote that he didn't even know the soldier's name. He didn't know if he had a family. He didn't know anything about him. But that face was burned into his brain. He saw it every time he tried to sleep for 50 years. He ended the diary entry with one sentence. I scream because I can't forget the look on his face when he saw me looking down at him, and I wonder if he had a father who loved him. I put the diary down. I looked at the Japanese flag. I looked at photos of young men in uniforms, most of them probably dead, and I finally understood why my gentle grandfather, who taught me how to bait a hook, screamed every night. He wasn't just screaming about the war. He was screaming about the boy in the hole, the one he had to kill, and the friend who never got to go fishing. I still go fishing. Sometimes when it's quiet on the river, I think about Mickey, and I think about that unnamed Japanese soldier, and I hope wherever they are, they found some peace, because my grandfather never did.